Computer. Okay, folks. Hi, this is Will Cook, and welcome to the Will to Win podcast. I'm your host, Will Cook, again, and today my special guest is Michael Eck. Mike has an amazing story to share with us, um, a story that kind of is a lot of teachable stuff, teachable moments in it, and has led to kind of success within his own life. So, welcome to the show, Mike.
Great to be here and can't wait to get going.
Awesome. So, Mike, there's a lot of things in terms of your background I see that are very interesting. It looks like you had a 40-year career on Wall Street. You're a holder of an MBA from Northwestern. Um, you played football at the University of Virginia at the McIntire School of Commerce, I believe. And you were also an academic All-American. Um, I did also see that you were interim CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame Village, which is interesting. That would be interesting to get into a little bit more. But listen, you and I both know the real reason you're here. So take us into um, the great memory and the great foundation of this conversation.
Yeah, so thanks, Will, and I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about all this. Um, so yeah, I've had this story rattling around in my head for close to 50 years. Um, and it was a foundational and fundamental story that now in retrospection, not when it happened as a 16-year-old knucklehead, but in retrospection, was probably one of the most material influences in my life and those of my teammates and coaches. And just fundamentally, we this is Pittsburgh. This is the hotbed of football. All the crazy expectations. This was our senior year. We were one of the top ranked teams in the area, in the state, in the country. And we all had aspirations to play at the next level. And even some had aspirations to play in the NFL and ultimately did. 2 weeks into the season, and there had been rumblings about our teachers going on strike. The union was becoming very, very active. They had never been on strike before. Again, as a 16-year-old knucklehead, we were ignoring all that, just showing up at practice and playing our games. But 2 weeks in, I get a call from our head coach. I was a quarterback and a captain. Head coach says, let's meet Saturday morning, get all the team and the captains together. And effectively, the union pulled our coaches from our sideline and canceled our season in one fell swoop. So we
Wow.
went from a number one rated team in the Western Pennsylvania to basically being done, dream shattered. Oh my God, what do we do? And the shortest version, and then I'll let you ask your question. The shortest version is we went to the school board and negotiated with the school board to allow us to coach ourselves with three administrators who stood on the sideline and didn't know anything about football. But they gave us access to the fields, access to our equipment, organized transportation. And we stumbled through practicing games for 5 weeks. And all kinds of crazy stuff happened when you think about 16-year-olds coaching 16-year-olds. But we figured out ways to do it, some of them which were successful and some of which were, there's a reason 16-year-olds don't coach 16-year-olds. And so it's a story about how we were used as a bargaining chip in this bitter labor dispute. How, and I learned this in the research that I did, our coach got put into an unbelievably terrible position between his loyalty to the team and the loyalty to the union. And a young social studies teacher who led the union for the first time on their strike kept them together and got a good contract for them. So there's, I say it's a story about resilience. It's a story about young people desperately striving for what was in our heads at the time as goals. And as my publisher has said, Regalo Press, this is Friday Night Lights meets Lord of the Flies, slightly different version, but that's essentially what it is.
So this is the beginning of the book, The Strike Season. This is about the strike season, right? Um, and this is something you wrote years after the event. But so right at the beginning of all this chaos, tell me a little bit about what was it like for you to sit there as a 16-year-old and going, oh my goodness, like how are we going to do this? What were the feelings that were going through your body and through your mind? And did you immediately have doubt? Or did you just start to kind of like create this confidence? What started to happen there?
Yeah, I hope it doesn't come across because Will, you've had an opportunity to read the book that we had some master plan. We didn't. We woke up, we heard this announcement, never expected to be put in this situation, and immediately reacted as you think teenagers would react. Holy crap, what have they done to us? We were rip roaring mad at the coaches, at the administrators, at the union, parents, anyone within distance, and didn't have a plan. Didn't have any plan or any well baked experience to do what we did. So we quickly got the seniors and the captains together, gathered ourselves, and figured out we had one Hail Mary, and the Hail Mary was to go to the school board, and I describe it in the book, and beg and plead and cajole our case to allow us to, because I thought we were maybe ridiculously ignorant, that we were capable as captains in a team of doing it ourselves. And I don't know if I don't describe that as arrogance. I describe that as ignorance because we had never done it before. And so the feeling was just, they can't do this to us. We're left on our own terms. What can we do? What should we do? What path do we have? And our only path was really to get approval to continue practicing and playing. And I don't think that was the path originally of the board. The union thought when they pulled the coaches from the sideline, the board would cave within hours. The board thought when they allowed us to practice and play games that the union would cave, that no one expected this to continue for more than hours and maybe days. But it did. And actually, the more success that we had in practice and games, the less leverage each of them had. And so it was, in some ways, our success made it harder for them to settle versus versus easier. And we had we had success. We won all 5 games and scored 127 points and only gave up 1 touchdown. So we had some success. And again, I don't think anyone ever expected us to be in a position where it would last that long.
Okay. So tell me about some of the key players in this. I mean, because obviously no man is an island, right? So it was you, this quarterback. What were some of your teammates that kind of rallied around you? I know Sully was one of them. Tell us about the dynamics there and how you picked the leaders in this scenario.
Yeah, so it was, and Will, I appreciate you calling that out. This was a collective effort, and if it wasn't a collective effort, it would have failed in 10 minutes. And my 4 co-captains played individual roles that were consistent with their personalities. So you mentioned Sully, who was the captain on the defense, who was a DB, my best friend from first grade on. And he was Mr. Discipline. And part of what we had to do was establish rules, regulations, punishments, and be able to basically control outcomes as best we could as player coaches. And so Sully's role was basically to create ways we could discipline those who stepped out of line. Offensive lineman, guard John Cracker Ritz, toughest guy, strongest guy, biggest guy, smartest guy on the team. And he developed, game plans and practice schedules. And the other captain, Tony Agustinelli, Gusto, who was a ferocious running back, was militaristic, and he basically developed practice schedules that were minute by minute, bullhorn by bullhorn, and it basically became the 4 of us with a couple of other senior leaders that became more than just players. And we would workout practice plans. We did occasionally, and it's come out now. And I was in a book talk where the head of the union and my coach didn't know. The head of the union didn't know. We snuck over to coach's house once a week through his backyard. He had cop cars in the front to prevent us from doing it. And so the four of us would sneak over there, get game plans one night a week. And yeah, so it was, I say, and again, this is introspection. I don't want to make this to sound like we had a plan at that. The most important element of success is we had one mission. We wanted to get on the field. We wanted to create film. We wanted to make sure that we had our futures. And the only way to do that was to come together as a team. And at times we really did, and at times we really didn't. And that was the most important aspect of it.
Right. So you were mentioning the coach, right? So the coach, Art Walker, right? Um, so Coach Walker remained kind of loyal to you guys and his principles during all of this. And I know there was probably a lot of conflict within him about it, but what did his example teach you about leading with integrity? Because this guy had that. He had integrity. So how did that teach you about yourself and leadership, and how's that influence you?
One of the most interesting aspects of this whole exercise, and I said, if I don't sell a single book, it has been incredibly connected and valuable, was going back and interviewing teammates, coaches, and teachers. And I learned more about Coach Walker and what he went through and the exercise I did over the last few years than I did when I played for him in high school. I didn't understand. We didn't understand. We didn't have an appreciation for what he went through. And the way he describes it now, and the way he was articulated it when he got interviewed back then, it's the hardest decision of his life. And he's 4 children. He's been through a lot. He said this was by far the hardest decision. It was a team. He had cultivated us, and we were on the verge of doing something that probably was unprecedented and win a championship and all that good stuff. But he was uniquely torn because he was also extremely supportive of the union. He couldn't live in the town of Mount Lebanon where we went to school. He couldn't make enough money. And so we snuck over to his house in a town that he could afford. And so it became painfully obvious that he was a singular bargaining chip that we had no appreciation of until now, until I'm a 63-year-old person, a guy. So yeah, he just kept saying, and I refer to it in the book, I'll support my colleagues. I'm supportive of the union, but I will never turn my back on the team. And he did it in his own way, just like that. He supported the union. He was used as a bargaining chip by the union, but I never felt, and particularly now looking back, understanding what he was going through, I don't think my teammates did. We did the first day for sure that we got abandoned, but he never abandoned us. He communicated with us. He got into the foxhole as best as he could without crossing the picket line. And there were very, very bright picket lines. They're called scabs, and we had to go walk through picket lines when we had practice and games. And he never crossed it, but he never left us.
That's a lot of pressure on a 16-year-old. You had great leadership through Coach Walker, and you had parents that were very supportive, which we'll talk about as well. But that's a lot of pressure. How is it? Because you're being brought into adult situations. You knew nothing probably about unions and these type of hierarchies and stuff like that. How did you know, play football at the highest level and then lead and then have to deal with this people being angry with you and upset with you? How did you reconcile all of that?
The answer is, again, there was such a singular focus, and maybe it's because, at 16, 17, particularly as a male, you don't have a very well developed brain. We had one thing that we wanted to get to. We had to create tape. We had this. It's not like today where you have tape and you have texts and you have websites, and this is it. This, some of us were getting recruited, but the whole outcome of our futures depended on the success or failure of this one singular season. So it was, for us, it was like, what can we do? What are our options? What options don't we have? And so we didn't, and had never been through this. So we didn't, I described in the book, the first day we came to practice after they pulled the coaches, we didn't have parking spots. We're like, what the heck is, we didn't have parking spots because the teachers and the union members had already gotten there early. They were picketing the school. They were out front of the gates that we walked through to the high school. So it's like, whoa, wow, this is different. And that's when it hit me. And then, and, someone called me a scab, and I was like, scab? What is it?
Right.
Two,
Right.
I'm just playing football, and you're the same person who was calling me a scab was teaching me English last year. And so it was like, this is different. So
Right.
the answer to your question, I think it was read and react. And I for sure don't want to give the impression that we did have, I got to describe it. I had a notebook of how things were supposed to go in practice, and it never, ever went that way. And so it was a lot of read and react. And we were put into situations that, again, just had to react to, but with a singular goal of don't get distracted, and hope to God the next morning we wake up that they've settled and we're back to being normal.
Okay. I love this. So let's go back to what you just said about read and react. So is that a football term?
It is.
Okay, great. So read and react for the viewer. What does that mean? And how can read and react be applied in life?
Yeah. And it's not that you're not organized or well planned. You have done enough preparation that you trust your ability to read and react. So just simply in a football situation, you're given a play, you've practiced it hundreds of times, but you don't necessarily, given the example, a receiver has an opportunity to break hard out or to break soft out, depending on where the DB is. And I'm reading the same DB he is. And so we're going to read and react what that DB does. And that essentially is what we did here, is that we had a foundation and a fundamental, we had a structure, we had captains, so we had a structure of leadership. It just wasn't reinforced with adult supervision or coaches. And so we had a structure. And from that point on, it was, even though we had and again, I told you, well, I got some version of OCD. I had this wonderful notebook that had everything mapped out, that picture perfect. We got it. And nothing ever went near that stupid notebook that I thought had every answer.
How did you trust that? Like, in other words, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and you kind of had a plan, but then it didn't go quite the way you thought it would. So how did you then just trust that? Did you just trust the reps at that point?
Yeah. And also just, we had no option. We had no, not doing it was not an option. Failing was not an option. And again, going home and waiting for them to settle, that wasn't an option. Because, and Coach Walker said this, and he kept saying it when I was interviewing him now. He said, you can't repeat games. You're not going to have we can't extend the season. Because again, there were a couple of other schools on strike, but we were just done. We would just be out of it, gone. Never, that Bethel Park game, then the USC, they were just going to disappear. So you can't replicate. You can replicate academics. You can replicate other things, but you can't replicate the season. So it was do or die relative to keeping the season alive. And I'm talking about it like this was, again, it was read and react, because literally it was a Saturday morning. We got together, yelled and screamed at each other, and found a notebook and jotted some notes on a Saturday afternoon. We met with the school board on a Sunday. And on Monday morning, we were practicing without our coaches because we had the biggest game of our lives that Friday night. And so there was no hey, what do you think? And should we? And can we? It was, this is it.
Right. It's interesting. I'm going to bring it to the here and now. So, I've been doing this podcast for about 4 months, and one of the things I just said to myself is I'm not going to worry about so much the outcome. I'm just going to start. And I've gotten kind of lucky. I've had some really interesting guests, gold medal winners, world champion, World Series champion baseball players, guys who've climbed Mount Everest, played in the NFL. And the thing is, one of my friends said to me, the hardest part is the starting part because there's the nerves, there's you don't know where you're going, you know where your footing is. But there's something about just starting and trusting the uncertainty. And then there's the reps. And then you have motivation, and then you have discipline, and then you have habit. So, what would you say to the viewers about the importance of discipline and the reps? And before you answer that, Jalen Brunson, the world champion New York Knick, said you can contemplate the worst case scenario. It's okay, but then you have to figure, what am I going to do about it? So what would you do with that question? How would you answer that?
Yeah. And Jalen Brunson, wow, what a run those guys had.
Yeah.
Um, so again, I guess I'd say, and you're asking in this context, because what I was thinking when you were asking it, there are
Hmm.
certain circumstances and certain places where you do have reps and you do have a fundamental, and then like you starting this, you you jumped over the cliff and probably had more insecurities than your traditional day job.
Yes.
And I would just say this process and writing, I describe it in parallel to what you just described. It was jumping off a cliff, ton of insecurities, never done it before, still a ton of insecurities. Who the heck knows? You put yourself out there, and who the heck knows? So I commend you for jumping off that cliff.
Hmm.
This wasn't like jumping off a cliff. It was more ignorance than arrogance. When I stood in front of the board, and saw the union leader basically say, we have no place, we have no standing, we shouldn't even be part of the negotiation. And I'm thinking, I won't use the language, but what is he talking about? They're both using us as bargaining chips. And then it just hit me. You say, we've been doing this forever. We've been doing this since we can walk. Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, we've been playing a version of football since third grade. We called it Rumble Fumble, and then it was turf ball in high school. We've been in practices for 3 days since we were in fifth grade. Hell, we can do it ourselves.
Hmm.
What if we just
Hmm.
do it as if the coaches were there? And so I'd like to say it was some broad, expansive. No, it was just, I think we can do it. We can do it ourselves. He can coach the defense. He's got the offensive line. He's got this. We'll have a couple of those administrators stand on the sidelines and have water. We had an athletic trainer give us access to. It was like okay, we've been doing it,
Right.
and we just do it without
Well,
and
yeah.
learned very very quickly in that very first practice why there are 8 adults with hundreds of years of experience collectively that is required to get a successful practice done, because our very first practice, as you read, Will, was a complete disaster. But I think it was a combination for us at the time. Now, looking back, I have some reflections, but ignorance more than arrogance.
Hmm. So, and one of the things is that people will agonize over decisions. And once you, though, decide, because the word decide in Latin means to cut off from. So once you decide this is what we're going to do, that's sometimes just the hardest part is making the actual decision. And most people agonize because they haven't made the decision.
Yeah.
But once you make the decision, you actually commit. And then once you guys committed, you're like, well, it's not pretty, but this is what we want. You guys were clear on the outcome. Like, this is what we want to do. We want to have this team. We want to be successful. And yeah, it sucks at times. And yeah, it looks like it's insurmountable, but we're going to fight through things. We're going to fight through insecurities. We're going to fight through conflict, fight through actual fights, probably fist fights. So, but let me bring back to the core stuff here. So there was a lot of insecurities here on an individual level for you, and you were very honest about it in the book. So tell me about some of the things like your relationship with your dad, mom, siblings. Tell us about the parts that, maybe also from those insecurities that drove you as a person.
Yeah. So that was by far the hardest part of this writing this book and revealing this story. When I first wrote it, and I wrote it by hand, blue ink on loose leaf paper. My son is a successful literary agent, and he made the mistake of taking me on as a client. He said, "It's a good story. Go write it. Don't think about it. Just literally regurgitate it out on a piece of paper." And that's what I did. Gave it to him. He said, "There's something here," holds it up, drops it in the garbage, but this isn't it. And makes me go back and do 6 months worth of interviews, real research, and rewrite it again. And I do, and I bring it to him. And this answers your question. I bring it to him, and he says, "This is better, but you now have to." And my wife said the same thing when she read it. You have to write it first person. I didn't write this as my story the first two times I wrote it. I wrote it as our and we, my
Collective.
third party perspective. And they said, if you don't make it your story, it's just going to be another blanking football book.
Mm.
I said, okay, what does that mean? And I understood what they were asking me to do. So, chapter 2, the ending, the relationship with my father, how I felt with my siblings, were the toughest things to write, because it revealed, as you just said, yeah, I had a giant pile of insecurities. And that's giant pile of insecurities on one hand is what drove me. On the other hand, it's what I've been struggling with through most of my life as it relates to fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of not being good enough in
Mhm.
anything that I do.
Mhm.
I still have the voice. It's now my voice. It's not my father and mother's voice, but it started as my father and mother's voice, or at least with what I interpreted. And again, for a big chunk of my life, I said that's a great motivation, and but it has costs and consequences. And again, none of this was playing out at the time. I have done this in retrospection, but um, there have been, you know, personal costs associated with that type of insecurity that I've had to deal with, as the flip side of that coin of driving me to success.
Do you want to share any of those, the costs, or are we talking about something that's
Sure.
private or?
Yeah. I mean, the costs, and I do this in the book, and I'm curious if it comes across in the book, but my relationship with my father
Okay.
became strained, always some form of emotional gap. I didn't have the emotional language to bridge that gap. He didn't have the emotional skill set to close that gap. And so my father passed in 2013, and I've always had this lingering sadness that we never closed the father son gap.
Mm.
And I describe it more in the book in terms of how that developed and where I chose to go to school. And he's a Notre Dame guy, and Notre Dame was
Mhm.
like going to the Vatican and the Catholic Church, and I had a shot to go there, and I chose not to go. So there's a whole. I don't want to reveal too much of the story,
Right.
but that was probably the most difficult part of the story, is diving into the most well, probably one of the most important relationships in my life that I felt um, sad that I didn't close gaps.
Mm. Well, there's so much to unpack here, and I want to give the viewers also a teachable moment regarding this topic. One of the universal fears, and it's a fear, but sometimes we tell a story around the fear, is everybody that you meet on some level fears that they're not enough. And in concert with that fear is if I'm not enough, I'm not going to be loved, or I'm not worthy of it. So even if you talk to people like Tony Robbins, who have had, he's a peak performance guru, and people, he says he struggles with it not as much because he has a lot of references at this point of his life. But we have this fear that we're not enough and that we're not loved. And what I would say to the audience is, if you look at it as a fear, you don't have to build a case. And this is what I mean. Because people say, I'm not enough because I have ADD, because I'm not smart enough, because I'm this and that. Even if you were smart enough, and even if you were focused, and even if you were all these things, you would still have this fear. So what I would say to people is just look at it as a fear without having to give it a huge story. So, and it's also a great fuel, right? That we can use to become more. What I would say though, and you could decide how you want to answer this question. Now, we all have like a love language, right? We want to kind of be loved a certain way. Was there ways that your dad showed you love that were not the traditional ways? Like if you looked closely, you could see evidence of his love through gesture or certain things. Maybe he didn't say "I love you," or is there ways he showed you love that was maybe that you've noticed other than traditionally?
Yeah, and this will sound contradictory. I never questioned that he and my mother had unconditional love for me, and never questioned that.
Okay.
In retrospection, did I need more than that as a demonstration because of my own insecurities, sensitivities, need for hearing it? We didn't never heard it, never
Right.
heard it,
Hmm.
and never felt it literally, physically, touching, hugging. Never heard it because they just didn't express emotion in that way. Um, so that's the way I answer it. But I never doubted the unconditional love, and this is not blasting my parents. I've written an essay for another publication that said, did our parents get it right? And the fundamental premise of that essay was, when I look back, and I'm going to use myself here. If I got asked the question as a parent today, could this happen today? And as a parent, I'd say, hell no, I would never allow it to happen. Because I've spent, helicopter, whatever, some version of helicopter, some version of enabling, some version of standing too close to the sidelines that our parents didn't do.
Hmm.
And our parents, allowed us to feel consequences. And I felt the consequences of these actions and these decisions. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. But I think as a parent, I'll speak to myself, but I think generally we've we've protected our kids from feeling those consequences. So I'd say I, as a parent, would I want my 16-year-old, and they both played college football and they're both quarterbacks and captains? No, no. And are they capable? Sadly, I'd probably say not in the same way, because they hadn't, and it's not we're better or worse. They just hadn't been exposed to the same decision making consequences and responsibilities as 16-year-olds that our parents either allowed us to, or that's their parenting style. So I said when I someone it's complicated. Unconditionally loved, I probably needed more than they could give, and
Hmm.
man, they're probably as responsible for us muscling through 5 weeks of practices and games because of how I was raised.
Right.
Um, you know, but I talk about this is what you do for a living, but I talk about the gap with my father as a big, sad element that continues in my life.
Hmm. So, what we do sometimes in order to be, especially as men, we talk about significance. So in other words, being worthy of love. A lot of our identity, which is significance, is recognition and importance. It's one of the six human needs. So in terms of recognition and importance, is that sometimes men in particular will show their worth, that I am, if I am good enough, you'll love me. And if a man takes a hit to his significance, something happens to his identity, something goes wrong. sometimes the fear is I'm not going to be loved, and that's a frightening position to be in. But here's what's beautiful about that, and um, you now have an opportunity to make a massive difference with a story like this, and one that'll connect people, which is also one of the human needs, but also contribution and growth, which are two spiritual needs, is by doing this, you're growing constantly. You're going to be constantly learning. People are going to come up to you. They're going to tell you their story. You're going to contribute on a deeper level. That's going to bring you more happiness than any accolade you could ever get. Like, in other words, that you're going to be when this gets out there, people are going to be probably coming up to you or hearing about you or talking to you, and they're going to be crying because they're going to tell you something that parallels kind of maybe they didn't coach a high school football team, but maybe they surmounted some difficulty. And surmounting difficulty is the crucible that forms character. So there's a lot of that there. And you know, I bet you healed some of your own wounds through your parenting uh, and maybe you're trying to figure out who you are, but the reality is who we are is not something we find out. Becoming who we are is something we create. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I was just, it's hard to hear what you're saying. That's hard to believe those things will happen.
Why is that?
Because of the insecurity about this being the first time I've ever done anything remotely like this in terms of writing and in terms of exposing the story in a vulnerable way and having it be a version of my story and our story. So,
Hmm.
it's just hard to, but there has been so many connected elements of this that already I feel like what a great experience. Teammates, coaches, and I'm donating proceeds to my nonprofit, and they're
Yes.
all engaged and all really um, passionate about it, and it helps battle my own insecurities about. I've never written anything beyond a couple of emails and texts in my life.
Okay. So this is really important, and I want you to talk about steer as well. So one of the things I tell people when they're about to level up, go to the next level in their lives, go to that next identity. The insecurities start to ramp up.
Yes.
What happens is a lot of people, this is very important, a lot of people will stop at that point. And it's funny because I've been having more anxiety lately, and I'm trying to figure out. I did lose my father in December, which is still obviously, in here and here, but he's been part of my juice to move forward, so to speak. But I've been feeling this angst, and I'm reminding myself it's this level up angst. And you're also now an artist in a way. And when you write a book and you're a creative, it's a very vulnerable thing because you're putting yourself out there in a way that you've never been out there for. And so if your insecurities are ramping up, you're probably on the right track.
Perfect example. So I auditioned to do the audio voice of my own book. And I was like, and they were like, well, if you're not good enough, we're going to hire a professional actor. I said, but it's my book. I said, not anymore. Audio company owns it. So they were like, we own it. Um, and I auditioned and I had read it 1,000 times because that's how I write. I write and read, but I've never read it for someone else. And that old competitive was like, it's my story. I want to tell it. I want to read it and tell it. And I did. I finished it yesterday, and it was a blast. But and I did have a ton of insecurity. What am I doing? What? But it was a combination of, as you're describing, leveling up over anxieties. And I had that same ignorance and not arrogance that was like, it's my story. I should be able to do this, right? And so you're that's just one of probably 50 examples of what you're talking about is that, yeah, we're creating new anxieties for ourselves by choice. Um,
Yes.
and it's something about us that is drawn to it. And
100%. Yes.
if it
Yes.
wasn't this, it'd be something else.
Yes, this is wonderful because it's gonna steer us literally into another direction in this conversation. But before I do that, is the next Everest or the next conquest or the next thing, is that what keeps us going? But there will be an unfamiliar part of it, even though it's familiar. The challenge itself, being challenged, is familiar, but the unknown of the new challenge is which creates the anxiety. And the thing is, keep going. Like you had even mentioned to me, somebody came to you with, I believe, a movie offer, right? And
Yeah.
did that wig you out a little bit?
Yeah. I instead of, oh my God, this is great, wonderful, thank you, I freaked out and said, I thank you. I'm inspired. I'll take your name and number and all that wonderful thing. But I'm selling books right now and I can't think about anything else. And so it was more
Okay,
anxiety than it was allowing me to even think about it being a valuable commodity in another form. I'm getting
okay,
better with it, but it freaked me out and
okay.
in an anxious way.
Okay. I would obviously the book is what's most important right now. But that would be interesting maybe to kind of revisit in intervals over
Yeah.
time. And is it the overwhelm anxiety? Is it the anxiety of, oh no, another challenge and I'm scared of it, or a combination thereof? But I would kind of keep that on the back burner as an idea that maybe that's the next level after this, perhaps. Um, so all these things that from the strike season, from your senior year in high school, where you had this strike, and then you decided to have the courage to the team to move forward and do what it did, and then you come forward into your life, and you've been in leadership roles, and you've done great things. So, but in terms of something bigger than you, tell me about the nonprofit that you're founder of, the Steer for Student Athletes. I want to know a lot more about that.
Yeah. And this, we started it about almost 15 years ago. And I describe it as big brothers, big sisters, which people have an impression of on steroids. So I had always been involved in programs using sports as an engagement tools to change outcomes. But I had this gnawing, it always made me feel better, but I wasn't making any sustainable change. And buying shoes and pizza and all, it made me feel better, but it wasn't getting to a sustainable outcome. So I was inspired by an article Alex Wolf wrote, who was a 35-year top writer at Sports Illustrated, and they turned him loose to do research on can sports save the world was the headline on the article that he wrote, and he developed a lot of um, research on can sports save the world and the most pressing problems the world faces, and he went all over the world. I called him when he got back and he had done this and printed this. And I said, the biggest mistake he's made in his life, he picked up the phone when he talked to me. And he said, there's two things you need to do. It's got to be mentorship. It's got to be role modeling, people that look like the people you're trying to help. And it's got to be tailored. So we developed on those two principles. Steer for Student Athletes is based on extreme mentorship in the toughest circumstances and the toughest school districts. It's 24/7 year round tailored services
Hmm.
to student athletes as young as seventh and eighth grade. We never take a student on beyond 10th grade, and we apply mentorship tailored services, get them through high school, get them into a college, get them through college, and into the workforce. So we are with the student athlete and however her or his nuclear family is for basically, it can be a 12-year period. And so it was to make sustainable change. We've had hundreds of kids go through the program. We've been blessed with a great staff. Alex is still involved with us. Alex Wolf is still involved with us. And yeah, I say it's at this stage of my life, I don't do any for-profit work that doesn't have a component for Steer for Student Athletes. And so in launching this, and this, again, all proceeds from book sales will go to Steer and support the Steer program.
Does the Steer for Student Athletes, is there a website for that?
There is steerforstudentathletes.org.
Okay.
And yes, and it should be describe the website will describe it much better than I just did.
Okay. And so there is a place where people could click to either donate or read about it, the synopsis and stuff.
Absolutely. There's two ways you can do that, Will, as you just described, and/or go to Amazon, click on the strike season pre-order, and you just know that whatever was going to the author is now going to strike season or to Steer for Student Athletes.
So what is the official release date for the book?
So the official release date is August 11th. We've been in pre-orders for the last many months. We launched our marketing campaign in Pittsburgh as part of the NFL draft. There was a Friday Night Lights exhibit, a couple of book events. We got a full slate of stuff in the fall, and we're hustling right now after some national platforms to unveil and release strike season right around when it gets released in August. So hustling a lot, and again, spectacular, and enjoy opportunities like this with you at Will to Win. You're doing a really, really valuable, and for you, I mean, as you said, you just started this, and I'm honored and for sure humbled with some of the other guests you've had on. People actually recognize their names. They don't recognize my name, but
they will. They will. If you could sit down today with every high school athlete, coach, and parent, what lesson from strike season do you believe has the power to change the trajectory of their lives?
Yeah, I say, and again, this is only in hindsight. I don't want to present it as this was the plan. Is that parenting lesson is either as a student athlete, either as the coach, either as the parent, allow yourself, if you're the student athlete, allow yourself, if you're the parent or the coach, for that young person to take and be responsible at a higher level and a higher degree to learn the feelings and impacts of good consequences, and just as importantly, bad consequences. Let yourself, let them feel it, because you're going to have both for the rest of your life, and the more resilience you can develop at an early age, the better you're going to be responding to bad outcomes. And so that's resilience would be and feel consequences of either your actions or the circumstances, if you're the coach or the teacher or parent that you're putting your kids. Let them feel the C minus. Let them feel that, don't bail them out as quickly as, parent teacher conference, my kid got a B, and, my kid only gets A's. And no, they don't. No, they don't.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not talking about other parents. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about how, let the kids feel the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have helicopter parents, but we also have lawnmower parents. And what lawnmower parents do is they clear out all the obstacles. It's almost like they don't want their kids to go through pain. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the things that I'm most proud of in my life are as a result of massive pain and massive growth as a result of massive pain. And these kids, when they're hit with a challenge these days, they fall apart because they haven't been challenged. And, and I think that there's also something to be said about grit, which is, perseverance and passion together. And Jalen Brunson is not the greatest player, but he has incredible grit and incredible work ethic. And he's also calm because he trusts his reps.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of kids, when they haven't had the discipline, which everybody talks about motivation. Motivation is not, it doesn't last. Discipline is great when you're doing something, even when you don't want to do it. But what's even better than that is a habit, right? So a habit is you'll do it no matter what, whether it's raining, whether you're tired, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. And so we don't want participation trophies. We want people to have these difficult times. And you were at 16 years old, you were getting the biggest lesson of your life, and it's trusting the not knowing, and then people coming together and adjusting to difficulty. And so I love your story. It's very compelling. It's amazing. And you are right up there with any guest. Some people, again, might have a gold medal, which people can recognize right as a symbol, but your story is extremely unique. And there's so many teachable nuggets in that book. And you just set such a beautiful tone too, where you talk about, like, I'm hearing the cicadas, and you're talking about rumble fumble, which we used to call, I think, kill the ball carrier. And you're talking about Pennsylvania, and you could like almost be there. You could feel the heat. You could the mills, you really set a tone for it, and it's compelling. It brings you in, and the way you describe each person, whether it be Sully and then all the stuff with Coach Walker. Is it Walker or Welker?
Walker. Yep.
Walker. Yep. And it really grabs you. And I think it was also really great how you talked about how people had done post all of this. I think that was really smart, because you got the chance to see, where did they go? What did they become as a result of this? So I think the book is excellent. And
Thank you.
and I really do. I really enjoyed it. I read it at there's a cigar lounge I go to in Stanford, and I had my not iPad, it's the other version of it, Samsung's version of it, but I kept going through it and going through it and going through it, and I just you really set the tone, and the way you described the people, the way you described your own experience, the process, and also the story. You probably had to do a lot of research on what happened behind the scenes with the union and stuff. I would imagine there was a lot of research on your part as well.
Yeah, and that was board minutes that still exist from 1979. It was that part of it was fascinating. I described it. I knew about half of what I wrote about, but the other half, no idea about Coach Walker, no idea about the union. Some of the stories I tell are stories I've lifted from my teammates that I didn't remember until they. So it was, I had about half of it, and then half of it was just brand new, and shaped the rest of the story. And I'm thankful and grateful for what you described. Again, as a first time, it's hard to hear it, but I'm trying to allow some of that to process, because
Mhm.
that's it's all new. It's all new for me. If we're sitting
Well,
and doing a deal in investment banking, got it. If we're
right,
sitting talking about my book, don't got it just yet.
right, right.
May never
And,
get.
and right, because what happens is you have a sense of who you are and your identity and your blueprint, and what you're hearing goes a little bit against it. But because it is your, again, that leveling up experience is this. You will, as you evolve into this new identity or this level up, you will be able to hear it more. But a lot of this is so new, and it'll dissolve the walls in a way. And I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy for you on like 20 levels, but I'm really happy for your development. And I also am really happy for you in terms of who you're going to impact. And I really appreciate you being a guest on The Will to Win. I'm humbled and honored as well.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a fabulous experience, and I know you're going to be successful with your will to win, and anything I can do to be helpful, I'm here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being a wonderful guest. Okay, folks, this is Will Cook signing off from the Will to Win podcast. Take care, folks. Have a good day.